Welcome, Georgia students, to our electronic sessions. This is Dr. Dina Mohsen, and today I'm gonna introduce a very important part or a very important chapter in finance, which is risk and return. Today we're gonna discuss the meaning of return, the meaning of risk, types of investors. Today we are concerned mainly with those investors in the stock market and how to select stocks based on the trade-off between risk and return. So we have different types of investors. You will be one of them. You're gonna determine your type based on the definition. Also deciding on the stocks to invest based on your risk preferences. We're gonna discuss concept of coefficient of variation, and we're gonna know how to calculate the risk and return for a single asset. Okay, and if we have different scenarios for investment, if we have different economic conditions, how to deal with this different scenarios of economy, whether a good economic condition or bad economic condition, how to deal with those different scenarios. Also, we're gonna know how to create a portfolio with different stocks, how to diversify our portfolio. It's very important to diversify your investments. It's not a good position or investment position to put all your money in one section or in one investment area. So we will know the types of risks that you can diversify and other type that you cannot diversify, and how to deal with this type of non-diversifiable risk. Also, in order to select stocks within your portfolio, you need to understand the correlation between those stocks, whether it's negative or positive correlation, and which the best solution or the best selection to form a portfolio. We will know how to calculate the return and risk for the portfolio, which is a pool of investments and a pool of stocks. Okay, you're not just investing in one stock, as we mentioned. Also, we're gonna calculate the weighted average beta in the capital asset pricing model. Capital asset pricing model is needed to determine your required rate of return, or the return that you will not accept investing your money in the stock except achieving this rate of return. All of these topics, inshallah, we're gonna cover in this chapter. Let us start with definition of return and risk. Return is not just the profitability you achieved from an investment. Return is related to the profit and loss. It's the result of your investment. Okay, you put money in an investment or in a stock market, so the result of this investment may be positive or negative. You may achieve profit or loss. So the possibility of achieving gain or loss is related to the return. Okay? Risk is the uncertainty regarding the future, the unknown future. You don't know what's going on, what will happen in the future. You don't know what is the expected news. So this is the future, this is uncertain future. Due to uncertainty, we face a risk in our investments. Also, we can define risk as the deviation from the norm, or the volatility in the returns, the deviation from the expected return. And we will explain this in more details with our examples. Okay. Let us first calculate the return. Return. We mentioned that return is the result of the investment, whether profit or loss. In order to calculate the return, we need to know the price of today. It's the new price, the price of yesterday or an period ago, or it's the purchasing price divided the old price or the purchasing price. I bought the stock with 10 pounds. Okay, and I sold the stock with 100 pounds. So the difference between 110 is my capital gain. This is the return I achieved. This return, as I mentioned, can be positive or negative. So the return can be, for example, you bought a stock with 50 pounds and you sold the stock with 30 pounds. This is loss. why we divide by the purchasing price or the old price? Because we need to get the value in percentage form. It's important to get the value in percentage form. Okay, £3 profit when the stock is with £100 is different from £3 profit when the stock is with £10. So it's important to convert this return or this profit into percentage form. That's why we are dividing by price of yesterday or the old price. So here we need to know the price of today. We can call it the new price or the selling price. Okay, we need to know also the price of n periods ago, or it's the purchasing price, old price. So it's the new price minus old price divided old price. What about the cash flow or the distribution of dividends? Some companies distribute dividends during the holding period of the stock. So you bought a stock and you held the stock for 3 years. During those 3 years, the company distributed dividends. So you need to consider this dividends as a return for your investment. So if the company distributed dividends, you need to consider this dividends as a sort of return. Okay, let us take an example for that. Robin wishes to determine the return on 2 stocks she owned in 2012. At the beginning of the year, Apple stock traded for 411. Okay, this is at the beginning. So this is the beginning or the old price. Regarding Walmart share, the value was $60. So this is Walmart and this is Apple stock. Let us write it here. The stock was $0.23. Okay, this is the beginning price. During the year, Apple paid dividends of 5.3. So Apple paid a dividends of $5.3. Sorry for that. Okay, and Walmart paid a dividends of $1.59. Okay, at the end of the year, the stock was 532. This is Walmart, 532.17, while Walmart was $68.23. How to calculate the return of each of them in order to determine the profit or loss achieved in the 2 stocks. Regarding Walmart, the ending price is 68.23. The beginning price was 60.33. Walmart distributed dividends of 1.59, so this is the dividends. I will add it here. All of that divided by the old price, which is $60.33. So here, regarding Walmart, the return was 15.7%. This is the return achieved for investing in the Walmart stock. Regarding Apple, we need to know the new price. Okay, the end of year price, it was $532.17 minus the beginning price, which is $411.23. The company already distributed $5.3 as dividends. All of that divided by the old price, which is $411.23. So this will yield us 30.17% return. So you achieved the return of 15.7% in Walmart, and you achieved a return of 30.17% in Apple. Okay, this is the way how to calculate the return for your invested stocks. What about the different types of investors? How to select the stock based on your risk preferences, okay? Some investors are risk averse. Risk averse means that you will accept higher risk if you're compensated with higher return. أنا مش هشتري السهم ده إلا لو هيحقق لي العائد اللي أنا عاوزه، هيحقق لي عائد كبير. ليه؟ لأن السهم ده very risky. So this is risk averse. I will not accept the stock except if the stock compensate me with high return. Risk neutral. Risk neutral, they don't consider the risk at all. They just prefer the stocks with higher return, regardless of the risk. They don't consider the risk. While risk-seeking persons, they prefer stocks with high risk regardless the return. Let us take an example for this. If you have stock A and B, the return of stock A is 10% and B is 10%. So you have the same return here. But you have different risk. The risk of stock A is 3% and the risk of stock B is 4%. As a risk-averse person, of course, you're gonna select the one with lower risk. Why? Because both stocks achieve the same return. So if we have same return, we will select stock with lower risk. If I will accept higher risk, I need higher return. And this is not the case here. So as risk-averse, I will select the stock with lower risk because both of them achieve the same return. Okay? Regarding risk neutral, those people that don't consider the risk, it's indifferent for them. Those two types of stocks are indifferent because they both achieve the same return. As they achieve the same return, and I don't consider the risk, I don't look at the risk, so they are indifferent for me. Okay? Regarding the risk seeker prefer the stock with higher risk. So risk seeker person will select the stock with higher risk. Okay, and while we are explaining the chapter and we go further in explaining the meaning of risk, you will understand why this person select the stock with higher risk. Okay. Because risk is deviation or volatility in the prices. So the higher the risk, the higher the deviation, whether to the positive direction or negative direction. That's why they are selecting stocks with higher risk because they expect that the deviation will be to the positive direction. إنه السعر هيزيد أكتر من إنه هيقل. البروبابيلتي أو الاحتمالية عندهم إن السعر يزيد أكتر من إنه يقل، فبالتالي هيختار الريسك العالية اللي هتعمل volatility عالي في أسعار الأسهم. Okay. طيب, if we have another example that we have different return with the same risk, also it's easy to determine which stock to select. The same risk, so as a risk averse, I will select stock B with higher return. As risk indifferent, I will select stock B because it achieves higher return regardless of the risk. If I'm risk seeker, those two stocks are indifferent for me because I prefer stocks with higher return, higher risk. Both achieve the same risk, so it's indifferent for me. Okay, look at this third example. We have different returns and different risk. Different returns and different risks. Okay, how to determine? I have different return and different risk, and I don't know as risk averse how to select the stock. In order to determine which stock to be selected, the stock that provide me with highest return with acceptable risk, we need to calculate the coefficient of variation. The coefficient of variation, which is risk divided average return. Sigma, or the risk, this refers to the risk, divided the average return. In this case, we are relating the risk to the return. The lower the ratio, the better. Is risk averse. The lower the ratio, the better. Lower ratio means that the risk relative to the return is low. Okay? So in those two stocks, you can divide risk by return, and you're gonna select the stock with the lower coefficient of variation. The lower value, the better. So here, this is the risk divided the average return. Okay. This is another example that illustrates how to calculate the return. Okay, you have already, this is the stock price at the beginning, the end, and the dividends paid. This is the same stock. Okay, this is the same stock for 2013, 2014, and 2015. Okay, so in order to calculate the return in each year, it's very easy. You're gonna take the ending price minus beginning price divided beginning price. But of course, you will add dividends. So the ending price, okay, which is 36.5 minus beginning price, which is 35 plus dividends distributed, which is 3.5, to get 14.3%. This is the return for this stock in the first year. Let us calculate the second year, 2014. Here is the ending price, it's 34.5, minus beginning price, 36.5, plus the dividends distributed with it, which is 3.5, okay? Divided the beginning price, which is 36.5, you will get 4.1%. You need to notice here that the beginning price is higher than the ending price. So here the stock achieved loss, but due to the dividends distributed, the stock is still achieving positive return, okay? But it's very low relative to the previous year. Regarding 2015, the stock return is the ending, which is 35 minus 30, 4.5 plus 4 divided 34.5, so the return is 13%. Okay, this is separate return for each year type. If someone asked you about this stock, okay, what about the return of this stock? Are you going to mention or to say that stock in 2013 it was 14.3, in 2014 it was 4.1, in 2015 it was 13? It's impossible to do that. If you're a portfolio manager, it's impossible to do that. You need to provide the investor with an average return. محتاج تقول له متوسط أسعار. ما ينفعش تقول له السعر السنة اللي فاتت كان كذا واللي قبلها كان كذا، لا لازم تقول له متوسط أسعار. هتقول له الستوك ده في المتوسط عامل average return of وتقول له ايه average return. طيب how to calculate the average return? I think you took it already in a statistics course. The average of the numbers in different periods, it's very easy. It's the summation of return divided n. So here we have 3 years, okay? So we will take the summation of the 3 returns and over the 3 years divided n, which is 3, the number of years. In that case, our return will be summation x divided n. X is 14.3% plus 4.1% plus 13%, all divided on 3. Okay, so this is how to calculate the average return, which is 10.5%. So when someone asks you about this stock and about the return of this stock, you will tell him that the stock on average achieves 10.5% return. Okay. What about the risk? We mentioned that the risk is the deviation from the norm. What is the norm here? The norm is the average return. أنا بحقق تقريبا عائد 10.5%. أوكي؟ طيب أنا عايزة أشوف طب الديفيشن او الفولاتيليتي في الاسعار دي بتحصل بنسبه قد ايه؟ الاسعار بتتحرك او العائد بتاع السهم بيتحرك بنسبه قد ايه؟ عشان احسب له الفولاتيليتي بنسبه قد ايه او تحركات الاسعار بنسبه قد ايه، محتاجه احسب له standard deviation او the risk. So the standard deviation is the deviation from the average return, the deviation from the norm. Okay, let us call the return for the 3 years as x. X, it's the return for the 3 years, 14.3, 4.1, and 13. Okay, this is X. You can call it K, R, whatever you want, but you need to understand that this is the return, the separate return in each year. over the 3 years. You calculated already X bar to be 10.5%. So X bar is the average return. Also, you can find it as K bar, R bar, whatever the name or the sample. Just you need to know that this is an average return, which is 14.3 plus 4.1 plus 13 divided 3. We already calculated this number to be 10.5. Okay. Deviation from the norm means that how much the average return is different from each year return. قد ايه السعر بيتغير، قد ايه السعر بيتغير عن المتوسط بتاعه. الافريج ريتيرن السعر كل سنه او العائد كل سنه بيتغير قد ايه عن average return بتاعه. قلنا the deviation from the norm. Okay, so here you need to calculate x minus x bar, x minus x bar, power 2, divided n minus 1, then you get the square root. Here it's power 2 in order to avoid the negative sign, okay? Because you will find here, for example, they have a negative sign. In order to avoid the negative sign, statistically, we make it power 2. Divided n minus 1. We have 3 years, so n minus 1, this will equal 2. Okay, let us solve this in a table. It will be easier for you to calculate the risk. So let us calculate this in form of table, okay, in order to be easier for you to calculate the risk and return. Okay, here we have, as we said, x bar. We need to calculate x minus x bar power 2. X is 14.3, 4.1, and 13. X bar is 10.5, as we mentioned. So here x minus x bar power 2 is 14.3 minus 10.5 power 2. Okay, then for the second year you will have 4.1 minus 10.5 power 2. For the third year it's 13% minus 10.5% power 2. You need to get the summation. Okay. And then you will divide it by n minus 1, which is 2 already. Then you will get square root of the answer. Otherwise, you can calculate it directly on your calculator by just putting the numbers into brackets. 14.3% minus 10.5 power 2 plus 4.1 minus 10.5 power 2 plus 13 minus 10.5 power 2. You will get the summation. You will divide by 2, which is n minus 1. Then you will get the square root of the answer. So here the square root 2 yield the result of 5.6%. This means that this stock achieves on average 10.5% return, and the rest is, or the deviation from the average return is 5.6%, which is a high risk. Okay. This is regarding calculating the risk and return for a single asset in different periods of time. If you have different periods of time, 3 years as we mentioned now, so we have separate return for each year. In order to get the average return, we will calculate it as summation x divided n, the summation of returns in different years divided n, and the standard deviation or the risk is the summation x minus x power 2 divided n minus 1, and then you calculate the square root. Okay? Of course, after calculating the risk and return for each stock, you can compare between them using coefficient of variation that we explained before. We said that coefficient of variation is sigma, which is the standard deviation, divided x bar. This is the coefficient of variation. So you may have in your exam 2 stocks with different risk and different return, or you may calculate the risk and return for this stock, and then I will ask you which one to select. Which one to select? We will base our answer on the coefficient of variation, which is sigma divided x bar. Then we will select the stock with the lower coefficient of variation. Okay? Let us assume the second case, that we have different scenarios. We have different economic conditions, okay? The stock may achieve different returns based on the economic condition. So we will have the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely. If nothing changed in the economy, what will happen? What will be the average return? So this is scenario analysis. In order to calculate return based on scenario analysis, we will have probability for each scenario. So the probability of occurrence for each scenario. Let us see an example for that. Here we have asset A and asset B. Okay, asset A, it's pessimistic, or the worst scenario, it achieves like 13% return. Most likely this stock achieves on average 15%. The optimistic or the best case scenario is 17%, okay? And you will have here the probability for each scenario to be achieved. And this is very important. أنت a portfolio manager or investor decide on which stock to select. You will have like a subjective assumption about the probability to be achieved, the probability that each of those return will be achieved. Of course, in the exam you will have given probabilities and given returns. Okay, how to calculate average return for this stock that have different possibilities or different scenarios? Okay, it's very simple. You need to multiply the probability of occurrence in the first case by the return of the first case, plus the probability of occurrence for the second case, multiply the return of the second case, plus the probability of occurrence for the third case, multiply the return of the third case, and you will get the summation, and that's it. This is the average return of the stock. So here, to get the average return of a stock that has different scenarios, you need to calculate it as follows: summation x multiply probability. Summation x multiply probability. What about the second stock? Here the return is 15%. What about stock B? Stock B, its worst case is 7%, the most likely scenario is 15%, and the best case is 23%. Okay? فأحسن حالته هيعمل 23% عائد. Okay. How to calculate the return or the average return of the stock? You need to know the probability for each return, the probability of occurrence of each return. In the first case, it's probably will achieve by 25%, the second case by 50%, and the third case by 25%. So to get the average return, you need to multiply the probability of occurrence by the return, as we done here. So 25 by 7% plus 50% plus 50, multiply 15% plus 25% multiply 23%, and you will get the summation. This is the average return of this stock. So you will notice here the stock A and B, they have both the same return. But you need to notice something very important: the deviation and the return. Look here, the deviation of the return, it's 13, the worst case, 17, the best case. But here, the worst case is 7, and the best case is 23. So the deviation here is very large. The range is very large. What is the range? Range is a concept that indicates the risk also, like the standard deviation. But the range just considers the best and the worst case. So it's not that accurate, but it indicates the risk. لما نلاقي ان volatility عالية جدا، نلاقي ان أعلى رقم أو أوحش رقم وأحسن رقم في الستوك، الفرق بينهم كبير جدا، فده معناه ان الريسك عالية جدا في السهم ده. If I'm a risk averse person, I will select the stock with lower range, with lower risk. Okay? Here Okay. So here to calculate the range for stock A, it's 17 minus 13. Okay. For stock B, it's 23 minus 7%. So you can notice here that the deviation is very large in stock B. So this means that stock B is riskier than stock A. So range is one of the important concepts related to the risk, indicating the risk. So we have now standard deviation and the range. Standard deviation is more accurate than the range because the range considers only two variables, the best case and the worst case. Let us calculate the risk in case we have different scenarios or different probabilities, okay? If you have different probabilities, you need to consider also probability while calculating the risk. So in those two stocks, we had already average return. Let us write it as x bar. X, the return separately, the return in each case separately. Okay, x bar is the average return we already calculated. It's 15%. Okay, and this is 13, 15, and 17%. This is the worst case, and this is the best case, and this is the most likely. Okay, as we mentioned before, risk is the deviation from the average. The deviation from the average return. Average return is 15%. But here we need to consider the probability. So we need to write here the probability. The probability for the first case is 25%. Probability for the second case, which is most likely 15%. And the probability of the last case is 25%. Okay, this is the probability. How to calculate the risk? It's x minus x bar power 2 multiply probability. You will get the summation of this, okay, and then you will calculate the standard deviation here. So x or r minus r bar power 2, the summation, multiply the probability. How to do this here? So here you need to know x minus x bar multiply power 2 multiply probability. It's 13% minus 15% power 2 multiply the probability, which is 25%. For the second case, it's 15% minus 15% power 2 multiply 50%. Okay, it's 0 because both are the same. For the third case, which is best scenario, 17% minus 15% power 2 multiply the probability, which is 25%. You will get the summation here, and then you will calculate the square root. This is the standard deviation or the risk. Let us see the standard deviation of stock A here. X minus x bar multiply the probability, it's 1%. For the second case, it's 0. For the third case, it's 1%. We will get the summation, which is 2%. Then you will calculate the square root of the result. You will get 1.41%. What about stock B? It's 5.66%. So it's very clear that risk of the first stock is lower than the risk of the second stock, which is indicated also from the range we already calculated before. We found that the range in stock B is very large relative to the range in stock A, which confirming the result that stock B is riskier than stock A. I need you to consider or to notice something, that the higher the risk, okay, the higher the return. The higher the risk of the asset, the higher will be the return. So you will find that Treasury bill and Treasury bonds, of course Treasury bill is the least risky asset, the least risky asset because it's free of default risk. الحكومة مش هتيجي تقول لك أنا معيش فلوس أسدد الاستثمارات بتاعتك دي، فإتس free of default risk اللي هو عدم القدرة إنها تسدد الانفستمنتس اللي أنت عاملها اللي أنت مديها لها ترجعها لك مرة تانية بالانترست، فالديفولت ريسك قليلة جدا، فبالتالي الريتيرن كمان بيكون قليل جدا لأن أنت عندك benefit already. كل ما بنعلى شوية في الريسك كل ما هتلاقي إنه الريتيرن بتاعك يعلى ليه to compensate you for the higher risk. So treasury bond is more risky than treasury bills, so you will find it yields higher return. And finally, the common stocks, which is the riskiest asset, will provide you with the highest return. Okay. Now we're gonna talk about forming a portfolio. You calculated the risk and return of a single asset, one stock, okay? In case we have different scenarios or we have different periods like 3-5 years based on whether you are long-term investor or short-term investor. So we had already different scenario calculation and the average return in different periods of time. This is for single asset. But actually in the stock market, you are not investing in one stock. You need to invest in different sectors, different stocks, okay? And this is the concept of diversification. You need to diversify your portfolio. You need to diversify your investments. It's very important to diversify your investment not just in the sectors of the stock market, but you need to diversify it also in different business areas, in different investment areas. You may invest part of your money in the stock market, part of your money in gold, part of your money in real estate. So it's very important to diversify your investments. Okay, let us assume that you will put your capital in the stock market, so you will invest just in the stock market. Okay. In this case, the concept of diversification means that you need to invest in different sectors in the stock market. The real estate sector, the telecommunication sector, the pharmaceutical sector. Try to allocate your investment in different sectors, because if you invested all your money in one sector or in one company, if this company price fall, you will lose all your capital. But if you diversify your investment in different sectors, so one of the sectors may fall, the other sectors will support the capital, will rise. Okay, so this will support your capital. You will not lose all your money when you put them in only one stock or in only one sector. So it's important to diversify your investment in different sectors, okay, and in different business areas, as we mentioned, gold, stock market, real estate, okay. The main purpose of diversification is to reduce the risk. Reduce the risk of losing the whole capital, okay. This is the main purpose of forming a portfolio or of diversifying and allocating your investment in different sectors or different business areas. But we will face an important problem. That's diversification can help us avoid a type of risk, but not the other type of risk. We have actually two types of risks. The corporate specific risk, which is diversifiable risk, and the non-diversifiable, which is the systematic risk. What I mean by corporate specific or systematic, diversifiable or non-diversifiable. Corporate specific risk is the risk that's related to one company, okay? It's related to specific company or specific industry, okay? I can diversify it through putting my money in other sectors. If I'm allocating my money in different sectors, so if something happened to a specific company, this will not harm all my capital. I'll give you an example for that. في stock market، في Egyptian stock market حصل حاجات كتير جدا ممكن تكون corporate specific risk، زي مثلا ما حصل انفلونزا الطيور. اوكي، اكتر سيكتور اتاثر اللي هو السيكتور بتاع صناعه الدواجن. اوكي، ده اكتر سيكتور اتاثر في البورصه، فبالتالي لو انا كنت حاطط فلوسي كله في السيكتور ده كنت هخسر فلوسي كلها، لان الايفنت ده خلى اسعار الستوكس اللي في الصناعه دي اتاثرت نيجاتيفلي. اوكي، ف it's corporate specific، حاجة خاصة بالصناعة معينة أو بشركة معينة. أوكي، فبالتالي أنا لما أكون عامل diversification هقلل من مخاطرة إني أفقد الكابيتال بتاعي كله، لأني مش حاطه كله في الشركة دي أو في السيكتور ده. طيب what about the systematic or non-diversifiable risk؟ systematic risk الريسك اللي بتأثر على كل ستوكس الموجودة في البورصة، بتأثر على البورصة كلها. أوكي، global financial crisis. Global financial crisis affected all stock markets around the world. International market and national markets. Okay, all markets have been affected with all sectors and categories. Okay, so this is non-diversifiable. انت حاطط فلوسك، البورصة كلها اوريدي اتأثرت، ممكن الاستثمارات كلها تكون اتأثرت في البلد اللي انت فيها دي، فبالتالي ما قدرتش تعمل او تستفيد من فكرة الدايفرسيفيكيشن. اوكي، طيب تعالوا نشوف انه انا ممكن اتغلب على مشكله السيستماتيك ريسك اللي هي المخاطره اللي بتاثر على البلد كلها، زي ما حصلت مثلا الثوره اثرت برضو على الاستثمارات بتاعتنا كلها وعلى البورصه كلها. فلو انا كنت حاطط فلوسي في بلاد مختلفه ده كان ممكن شويه ياثر، يعني يحافظ شويه على الكابيتال بتاعي. بس خلينا نشوف يعني من ضمن الحاجات اللي تقدر تتغلب على السيستماتيك ريسك الانترناشونال انفستمنت اور انترناشونال diversification، بمعنى ان انا اكون حاطط فلوسي مش في بلد واحده، لا في بلاد تانية مختلفه. وغالبا الفورين انفسترز بيعملوا كده، بيحطوا في emerging markets، في developed markets، بيعملوا allocation للاسيتس or allocation للانفستمنتس بتاعتهم في اماكن وبلاد مختلفه. اوكي، we have also risk related to the international market, like the foreign exchange risk or the factors or the events that affect the world as a whole. زي ما حصل دلوقتي كورونا فيروس or the financial crisis، هي actually ما أثرتش على بلد واحدة، هي أثرت على العالم كله. فبالتالي في الحالة دي استثماراتي برضو هتبقى في ريسك. يبقى احنا مش بنتغلب على الريسك تماما، ولكن بنعمل ايه؟ بنقلل الريسك على قد ما نقدر عن طريق ان احنا نعمل الدايفرسيفيكيشن، especially if it's international diversification. Let us calculate the return and risk of the whole portfolio. احنا قلنا portfolio that you invest in different stocks. This we call this portfolio. انت بتحط فلوسك في اسهم مختلفة، فما بيبقاش سهم واحد، فبنسميها portfolio او محفظة مالية. اوكي، طيب عشان احسب الريتيرن اوف ذس بورتفوليو انا مش مفروض ان انا احسب ريتيرن اوف كل سهم في البورتفوليو بس. يعني يقول لك انت انا هروح اسال عن المحفظه بتاعتي عامله ازاي، فهيقول لي والله مصريه اتصالات عامله كذا، اوراسكوم كونستراكشن عامل كذا. مش هينفع يقول لي كده، هو هيقول لي average return of the portfolio، the average return of the portfolio. So in order to know the average return of the portfolio I need to know the weight of my investment in each stock of this portfolio and the return of this stock. يعني if I have a portfolio of 3 stocks, if I have a portfolio of 3 stocks, okay, A, B, and C. I have already 10,000 pounds. Okay, I put 2,000 pounds in stock A. Okay, 3,000 pounds in stock B and 5,000 pounds in stock C. So here you need to know the weight of your investment in each stock and the investment or the return of each stock in the portfolio. Okay, so here your investment in portfolio or in asset A is 20%, here is 30%, and here is 50% of your capital is in stock C. If you know the return of each stock, stock A for example achieved 10%, stock B achieved 12%, and stock C achieved like 13%. How to calculate the return of the portfolio? You will multiply the weight of the stock with its return plus the weight of the second stock with its return plus the weight of third stock with its return. So here you get the summation of weights of stocks inside the portfolio multiply the return of those stocks. We have here an example. We have two stocks, X and Y, okay? And we assume that we put 50% of our capital in stock A or stock X and 50% of our investment in stock Y. How to calculate the average return of this portfolio over periods, over 5-year period? Okay, we said it's the summation of weight of investment in stock A multiply its return plus the weight of investment in stock Y multiply its return. So in the first year, 2014, you put already 50% of your capital in stock X. So you will multiply 50% by 8% return plus the 50% in the other stock multiply its return. You will get the summation. So this is the return for the first year, return of the portfolio for the first year. If we come back to this example, so the return of this portfolio is 20% multiply 10%, the weight multiply return, plus the 30% weight multiply the return, which is 12%, plus the weight, which is 50%, multiply 13%. This is the weight of, or this is the average return of this portfolio. Okay, so if we calculated the return for each year separately, okay, and you need to know the average return of the portfolio over the last 5 years. How to get the average return? I got the average return for each year separately. Consider this as X, okay, and we mentioned before, in case we don't have different probability or different scenarios, how to calculate the average return over different periods of time? It's summation X divided N. So you will add all those returns together divided N, which is 5 years. This is the average return of the portfolio over the last 5 years. So here, the difference between single asset and a portfolio that you already knew the weight of each stock, you calculated the average return each year separately. After that, you need to know the average return over the 5 years. So we have to add them together and divide by 5. So here in this example, you will find the return of the portfolio by adding. So this is X bar of the portfolio. Its summation X divided N. Okay, so it's 12% plus 12% plus 12% all divided 5. Okay, so again, you calculated the weighted average return of the portfolio each year in one period of time by multiplying the weight, which is 50% of stock X multiply its return, plus the weight of stock 2 multiply its return. This is the return for this year only. In order to get the return for the whole period, you need to add them together or get the summation divided N, which is the number of years. What about the standard deviation of the portfolio? Okay, it's the same as single asset. Okay, you have X bar. You need to calculate summation X minus X bar power 2 divided N minus 1. And then you will get the square root. Where is X? X is the 12%. Okay, here, this is X. This is X. X bar is 12%. Here in our example, we have the same return for each year. That's why we have average return similar to them, which is 12%. Okay, but this is not a normal case. We will assume, we will apply risk and return for this case as we have in the board. So the average return, we added them together and divided by 5 to get 12%. So here we have X. Let us write the table as we used to. X bar, then X minus X bar power 2. Okay, X is 12% for the 5 years. X bar also is 12%. So you will deduct 12% minus 12% power 2. Okay, you will get the number. Then 12%, of course, here it's 0. 12% power 2, 12% minus 12% power 2 until you finish the 5 years. Okay? After finishing the 5 years, you will sum them together and divide by n minus 1, then you will get the square root of the answer. So here, it's x minus x power 2 plus x minus x power 2 for the 5 years divided n minus 1 divided 4. You will get 0% because, of course, you have already the same return each year that's equal to the average return. So finally, your risk here is 0%. Okay? This is regarding risk and return for a portfolio. It's very easy, but the main difference, as we mentioned, that in calculating return of the portfolio, you need to know the weight of each stock. And then you will multiply the weight of the stock by its return plus the weight of the other stock by its return, and so on. This is to calculate the return for only one period of time. If you have different periods of time, you will add them together and divide by n. Then you have x bar, which is the average return, and x, you will get the deviation from the average. The deviation from the average return, square root of this deviation, summation divided n minus 1, and then you will calculate the square root. Now, dear students, we need to know how to select stocks within our portfolio. Okay, we have something called the correlation coefficient. Correlation coefficient is the relation between different stocks, whether it's positive or negative, meaning that if we have positive correlation, this means that when stock X rises, stock Y will follow stock X. So they are positively correlated. When stock X falls, stock Y will fall. This is positive correlation. If the correlation is negative, this means that they are negatively correlated, meaning that if stock X rises, stock Y will fall. They are negatively correlated, and of course vice versa. If stock X falls, stock Y will rise. This is negative correlation. Or uncorrelated stocks. Uncorrelated stocks means that they are not related to each other. Okay, when stock X rises or falls, it doesn't matter for stock Y. They are not moving together, or they are not moving in the opposite direction. They are uncorrelated. Okay, for our portfolio to select stock, it's better to select low correlated stocks. Low correlated stocks. Okay, low correlation is very important, not to lose my own capital. Okay, for example, if I put my money in stock X, 50% in stock X and 50% in stock Y, and they are positively correlated. This means that if stock X falls, stock Y will fall. So I will lose the whole capital I invested in the stock market. If they are negatively correlated, if stock X falls, stock Y will rise, so that I will keep my portfolio, I will keep part of my capital. I will not lose all my capital. I will make like a balance in my portfolio. So a very important concept beside diversification is the correlation. I need to select stocks that are not correlated or have low correlation or negatively correlated. If I'm talking about someone that's he's so busy, he's not following his stocks in the stock market, so it's better for him to select stocks that are to some extent negatively correlated. That will help him to keep his portfolio balanced. Okay, but for those investors, for risky investors that follow their stocks all the time, that follow the stock market in price movements and have the ability to switch in different stocks and have the ability to convert from one stock to another, it's possible for them to select positively correlated stocks if they have higher probability that those stocks will rise. If they know that those stocks are most probably will go up will have a positive growth. So it's possible at that time to put your money in positively correlated stocks. Okay, but this is very risky, as we mentioned, because if one of them falls, the other will fall. You will lose the capital you invested in the stock market. Okay, so here we can show the meaning of positive and negative correlation. Positive correlation, the stocks are moving together. Negative correlation, they are moving opposite to each other. Perfect positive correlation means, for example, that when the stock increases 1%, the other stock will increase 1%. If the stock decreases 1%, the other stock will decrease 1%. This is perfect positive correlation. Perfect negative correlation, if the stock increases 1%, the other stock will decrease 1%. This is perfect negative correlation. And in real market, this is not the case. We don't have that perfect positive or perfect negative correlation. But we have strong positive or strong negative correlation. So our correlation would be between 1 and -1, okay? 1 is perfect positive correlation. 0.7 is a strong positive correlation. Below 0.5, it's low positive correlation. They are moving together, but it's low positive correlation, okay? -1 is perfect negative correlation, meaning that stock X and stock Y are moving opposite to each other. When one fall, the other will rise. Okay, so -0.7, this means a strong negative correlation. Below -0.5, it's weak negative correlation. Uncorrelated stocks, you will find that the correlation is almost 0. Okay, you'll find the correlation is 0.0001 or something like that. It's almost 0. They are uncorrelated stocks. Okay, it's near to 0 correlation. Okay. We can, of course, correlation coefficient can be calculated very easily using Excel sheets. You will find on Google, for example, or any finance site platform to calculate the correlation, or as we said, an Excel sheet in the function. You can find the correlation coefficient and calculate it easily. Okay, but what about calculating the correlation coefficient manually? How to do this? Correlation coefficient can be calculated by dividing the covariance of stock X and Y by the standard deviation of stock X and standard deviation of stock Y. Here the standard deviation is the risk. We already calculated before. المخاطرة, risk, standard deviation. We already knew how to calculate it. Okay. Covariance is the directional relationship between stock X and stock Y. Do you remember X minus X bar? We calculated before in order to get the risk or the standard deviation of the stock, the variance, X minus X bar power 2. Okay, here covariance, you are relating two stocks together. You are not talking about single asset, you're talking about two assets and the relation between those two assets. So here, the covariance of X and Y, you are correlating two stocks together. So in order to get covariance, you need to know X minus X bar multiply Y minus Y bar. You get the summation for that. Okay, again, here, X minus X bar power 2, it's related to the single asset. But when we're talking about, or we need to get the correlation between two different stocks, so you need to get the summation of multiplying X minus X bar. X is the return, X bar is the average return for stock X. Here, Y is the return of stock Y over time, and Y bar is the average return of Y. You get the summation of this. And then you will divide this number by standard deviation of stock X by standard deviation of stock Y. Finally, you will get the correlation coefficient, whether it's 0.4, for example, or 0.7. So here we have strong positive correlation. Here we have weak positive correlation. You may have 0.7 with negative sign, so this is strong negative correlation. Okay? Let us take an example for how to calculate the covariance. Here we have stock X and stock Y. The return of stock X is 2%, 3%, 2.7, 3.2, and 4.1. The return of stock Y is 10, 14, 12, 15, and 20. Okay? This is X. This is Y. If you need to get X par, as we mentioned before, you will add those returns together and divide by n. So you will add 2 plus 3 plus 2.7 plus 3.2 plus 4.1 divided 5. Here, after calculating the average return, it's 3%. This is the average return. You can calculate it and you will find the result is 3%. Regarding Y, to get Y par, you will add those values together and divide by 5. So 10 plus 14 plus 12 plus 15 plus 20 divided 5, you will get the result of 14.2%. So here, in order to calculate the covariance, okay, it's X minus X bar multiply Y minus Y bar in the first year, plus X minus X bar multiply Y minus Y bar, which is 14.2 for the second year, plus, and so on. Then you will get the summation for those values. Then you will divide them by standard deviation of X multiply standard deviation of Y to get the correlation coefficient. Okay, as we said, correlation coefficient is very important factor to take into consideration while forming your portfolio. Okay, here we have an example for 3 stocks. Okay, you may have this example in the exam. You have 3 stocks with different returns over 5-year period, stock X, stock Y, and stock Z. Okay, the investor decided to put, we will compare 2 different portfolios, portfolio A and portfolio B. Portfolio A is formed by stock X and Y. The investor will put 50% of the capital in stock X and 50% in stock Y. This is portfolio A, portfolio 1. Okay. Regarding portfolio 2, the investor will put 50% in stock X and 50% in stock Z. Okay. So again, how to calculate the average return for portfolio A and portfolio B? As we mentioned, the average return is the weight of stock X multiply its return plus the weight of stock Y multiply its return. So here in our example, if we're talking about portfolio A, weight of stock X multiply the return of stock X, okay, plus weight of stock Y multiply the return of stock Y. Okay, this is for the first year. So here it's 50%, as we mentioned, it's 50-50 investment. So 15% multiply 8% plus 50% multiply 16%. This is for the first year, and it's here 12%. We will conduct the same steps for the 5 years. Here you have 12%. 12% is the same average return in portfolio A for the 5-year period. Okay. We already calculated this portfolio and calculated the standard deviation of this portfolio. It was 0%. Regarding portfolio B, which is formed by 50% of stock X and 50% of stock Z, we will do the same steps. 50% multiply 8% plus 50% multiply 8%. The result is 8%. 50% of 10%, 50% of stock X multiply 10% plus 50% multiply 10%, and so on. Now you got the return of portfolio A and portfolio B over 5-year period. What about the average return of the portfolio over the 5 years? You need to add them together and divide by 5. Add them together and divide by 5. So the return here is 12%, and return here is 12%. Here it's 0 risk, and here it's 3.16% risk or standard deviation. Of course, as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, if we are going to compare between those portfolios and select one of them, we will select portfolio A, because portfolio A has the same return as portfolio B, but with lower risk. Here is with no risk, okay? I have another rule to calculate the risk of the portfolio if we have only 2 stocks. If your portfolio is formed by only 2 stocks, it's easy to calculate the risk of this portfolio. You have already the weight of each stock, you have the standard deviation of each stock, so it's easy to calculate the standard deviation of the portfolio without the need to form the rule of x minus x power 2 divided n minus 1 and then get the square root. You can make it in one step. Here is the rule. It's the standard deviation of the portfolio will equal to the square root of weight of stock x power 2, standard deviation of stock x power 2, plus weight of stock y power 2, standard deviation of stock y power 2, plus 2 multiply weight of stock x, weight of stock y, the correlation coefficient of stock x and y, the correlation coefficient of stock x, y that we already calculated before, the correlation coefficient of stock x and y, multiply sigma or standard deviation of x and standard deviation of y. Again, it seems there's a long rule, but you can keep it in your mind if you just understand it. Here again, to calculate the standard deviation of a portfolio that's consisted only of 2 stocks, you need to know the weight of each stock, the standard deviation of each stock, and the correlation coefficient between the 2 stocks. Okay, so you will get weight of stock 1 power 2 multiply standard deviation of stock 1 power 2 plus weight of stock 2 power 2 multiply standard deviation of stock 2 power 2 plus 2 multiply the weight of stock 1, weight of stock 2, sigma of stock 1, sigma of stock 2, multiply the correlation coefficient of stock 1 and 2. If you have a question like that in the exam, you have already calculated the weights and calculated the standard deviations and calculated the correlation coefficient, or it's given for you. So it will be very easy to just apply the numbers in the rule and get the standard deviation of the portfolio. This is regarding risk and return of a portfolio and how to select stocks based on the correlation coefficient. You know, you can determine just by looking at the values whether the stocks are positively or negatively correlated. Look here, this stock X and stock Y, the stock is increasing 8, 10, 12, 14, and 16. It's increasing over time. Look at stock Y. Stock Y is also, here stock Y is decreasing over time. It's not increasing, it's decreasing over time. Okay, so those 2 stocks are negatively correlated because as long as stock X is increasing in the return, stock Y is decreasing in the return. So by just looking to the values or the return, you can determine which type of correlation between those 2 stocks, negative or positive correlation. If you compare stock X and Z, here stock X is increasing and stock Z is increasing with the same rate, so this is a perfect positive correlation between the stocks. So again, just by observing the values of returns, you can determine whether the stocks are positively or negatively correlated. Okay, then a very important topic or a topic in this chapter, which is the capital asset pricing model. At the beginning of the session, we were differentiating between different investors type, and we mentioned that we have a type that's called risk-averse investor. This investor will accept higher risk if he is compensated with higher return. Okay, that's why you need to calculate the required rate of return. In order to put my money in this security or this stock, I have to achieve a limit or a minimum return to accept joining or buying this stock, a minimum return. This is the required rate of return, the return that you expect to get from this stock in order to approve putting your capital or putting your money in it. So we calculate the required rate of return using capital asset pricing model. Actually, the required rate of return considers the risk, okay, the non-diversifiable risk or the systematic risk. Why? In order to get the capital asset pricing model, here it's we will write the rule and then clarify each component in it. The required rate of return, which is R, the required rate of return, equal risk-free rate plus beta multiply market return minus risk-free. Okay, so it's risk-free rate multiply beta plus beta multiply market return minus risk-free. What's risk-free rate? Risk-free rate is the average return or the return that the government provide to the investor. It's the return that the government provide to the investor. Why we call it risk-free? Because it's free of default risk. We mentioned in this session free of default risk. يعني الجوفرمنت لو انت حطيت فلوسك معاها انت ضامن ان فلوسك هتجيلك. الجوفرمنت مش هتقول لك انا معيش فلوس ارجع لك الانفستمنت بتاعك او اديك الانترست بتاعك. That's why it's called risk free. It's free of default risk. How to get risk free rate? Of course, in the exam it's given for you. But I'm talking about the market. How to get risk free while you are calculating the required rate of return in the market. Risk-free rate can be obtained from the return on the treasury bills or treasury bonds in, you can find it in actually the site of Central Bank of Egypt, البنك المركزي. اوكي بيبقى already في tables فيها risk free rate للتريجري bill او treasury bond based on the type of the investor or the length of investment. انت short term or long term investment, you can select the risk free based on your duration of your investment. So risk free rate you can get it from the Central Bank of Egypt site. Okay, risk free actually consists of two items: the real return and the inflation premium. So here the government just cover the inflation, التضخم. The government should compensate you for the inflation rate. inflation يعني التضخم، يعني زيادة أسعار، يعني الباينج باور بتاعتك بتقل مع الوقت، فأنا لازم أعوضك عن زيادة الأسعار أو إن الباينج باور دي بتقل، فبالتالي أنا لازم أكفر الانفليشن، يعني مينيمم لازم أكفر الانفليشن ريت. فالريسك فري ريت بيكفر اوريدي الانفليشن ريت ويبقى عليه ريل ريتيرن. يعني ممكن تلاقي لو الريسك فري ريت مثلا 9% هتلاقي إنه for example 7% is to cover inflation rate, and the other 2% is the real rate of return. So the rate of return of the government is very low because the risk is very low, and we mentioned this also in the session. Okay, this is the risk-free rate. So if the inflation increased, this means that the risk-free will increase to compensate for the increase in the inflation. This is the first item, which is the risk-free. Plus beta. What's beta? Beta is the relation between your stock and the stock market as a whole. Okay, the stock market as a whole, meaning that an index indicating the performance of the stock market. Here in Egypt, we can use, for example, EGX30. EGX30 is a popular index that contains the most 30 active stocks in the stock market. أكتر 30 stocks عليهم liquidity وبيحصل فيهم تداول. Okay, this is the EGX30. We have also EGX100, EGX70. So we will select a popular index to refer to the stock market. Okay. And it's the market return. In order to get market return, we will get market return from the index of the stock market. Beta is the relation between the security you want to invest in and the stock market. Okay, let us see what's beta. So beta is the relative measure of non-diversifiable risk, meaning that the relation between your asset or the stock you want to invest in and the stock market. Okay, in other words, we can say that if beta is 1, this means that when the stock market as a whole, when the index of the stock market increases by 1%, for example, on 1 point, your stock will increase by 1%. Okay, so your stock is doing just like the stock market. It's not outperforming or underperforming the stock market. This is when beta is 1. So your stock is performing just like the stock market, just like the index of the stock market. When beta is 2, okay, when beta is 2, this means that your stock is outperforming the stock market twice. It's outperforming the stock market. So if the stock market or the index of the stock market increased by 1%, for example, your stock will increase by 2%. It's outperforming the stock market. At the same time, if the stock market drops 1%, your stock will drop 2%. Okay? If it's 0.5, this means that your stock is performing or reacting by just half responsive to the stock market. Okay, so if the stock market increased 1%, your stock will increase only by 0.5%. Okay, so this is beta, the relation between your stock or the stock you want to invest in the stock market, whether your stock is outperforming or underperforming the stock market. Okay, or just like the stock market. Underperforming, if the beta is negative, this means that your stock is moving just opposite to the market. يعني لو الماركت طلع 1% هتلاقي stock بتاعك بينزل 1% أو بينزل 2% based on the value of the beta. Okay, they are negatively correlated. عشان كده لما تكون البورصة بتقع, it's better to select the stocks that have negative betas because they are moving opposite to the direction of the stock market. The stock market is falling. If the stock has a negative beta, this means that the stock will outperform the stock market. Okay, will rise. So beta again is the relation between the stock and the stock market index. This is beta. What about if you want to calculate the required rate of return of the portfolio? Okay, so we need to get the beta of the portfolio. How to get the beta of the portfolio? It's very easy. As we mentioned before, how to get the average return of the portfolio, we need to know the weight of stock 1 and the beta of stock 1 plus the weight of stock 2 and beta. You will multiply it by beta of stock 2. So you just need to get the summation of the weights of stocks multiplied their betas. So you need, if you have 2 stocks in the portfolio, you need to know the beta of each portfolio, meaning that the relation of each asset with the stock market or with the index of the stock market, and you need to know the weight of this stock inside your portfolio to calculate the beta of the whole portfolio. Okay, so we have an example here. This is beta, and this is the portion of the investment in each stock, stock 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, in order to calculate beta of this portfolio, you will multiply the weight by beta plus weight of stock 2 by its beta plus weight of stock 3 plus, by its beta, and so on. So here it's easily to calculate the beta of the whole portfolio in both cases. So again, let us return. We knew what's beta, and we could calculate beta of the portfolio if we are concerned with calculating the required rate of return for the portfolio. We knew what's risk-free, we knew what's beta. Market return, it's the return of the index. You selected here EGX 30, okay? You selected a popular index in the Egyptian stock market. If you want to get the return of this index, so you will calculate the return as if you're calculating the return of a single asset. It's the return at end of the period minus return of beginning divided return at the beginning. Okay? The new return minus old return divided old return. The return of the end of the year minus the return at the beginning of the year divided the return of the beginning of the year. So it's easy to be calculated. Usually in the exam it's given for you. Market return is given for you. Minus risk fee. Here this part is called the market risk premium. What I mean by market risk premium, in order to invest in the stock market, which is very risky relative to the government, of course, it's very risky relative to the government, okay? As we said, government, it's risk-free or free of default risk. But when you invest in the stock market, there is fluctuations of the prices, and it's very easy to lose your capital. It's high risky investment. That's why you need to know the premium above the government return. يعني أنا عشان أقبل أخش في سهم معين لازم يحقق لي عائد أعلى من العائد اللي الحكومة بتحققه، وإلا أنا بالنسبة لي أحسن أخش أستثمر في الانسترومنتس بتاعة الحكومة، صح ولا لأ؟ يبقى أنا عشان أوافق أحط فلوسي في ستوك ماركت لازم تبقى مدياني بريميوم، يعني لازم يبقى العائد اللي هيتحقق في الستوك ماركت أعلى من العائد اللي أنا هاخده من الجوفرمنت، okay? That's why we call it market risk premium. The premium, the increase in the return of the market, of the stock market, above the return of the government. Okay? When we multiply beta by the market risk premium, it's called security risk premium. This is the return that will be achieved by this security specifically above the return of the government. Okay, what about considering an example here? We have a company, it's a computer software developer that wishes to determine the required rate of return on asset Z, which has a beta of 1.5. The risk-free rate is 7%, and the return on the market portfolio is 11%. Okay, let us substitute this to calculate the required rate of return as here. So risk-free rate is 7% plus beta, which is 1.5, multiply market return, which is 11%, minus risk-free, which is 7%. Okay, so here the required rate of return is 13%. This is the required rate of return. I will accept putting my money in this stock if it achieves at minimum 13%. Okay, if I give you an example, and I told you, currently the return of stock X, or stock Z, sorry, here stock Z, currently the return is 10%. Are you going to invest in this stock? If the return, the current return is then 10%. Okay, and the required rate of return is 13%. Are you going to invest? Of course not. Why? Because 13% is the minimum return to be achieved. Okay, it's the minimum return to be achieved in order to accept putting my money in it. So if the stock is achieving 10%, it's already below the required rate of return, so I will not accept putting my money or invest my money in this stock. But if the current return is 15%, so it exceeds already the required rate of return, that's why I will accept putting my money in this stock. Again, what I want to mention, the risk-free rate. The risk-free rate can change based on the inflation rate. So if the inflation rate increased by 2%, this means that the risk-free will not be 7%. It will be 9%. You will add the 2% increase in the inflation rate. So you have to know that the risk-free rate is affected by the inflation. So in the example, if I gave you risk-free rate and then I told you, or I put an assumption that the inflation rate increased by 2%, you need to consider this in your solution. You need to add the 2% increase in the inflation rate on the risk-free rate, because it has to cover the inflation rate. It's inflation premium plus the real return of the government. Okay, that's it. We just finally want to mention some drawbacks or disadvantages for the capital asset pricing model. Is that capital asset pricing model deals with historical values. Okay, when I'm calculating beta, for example, I'm calculating beta using historical prices, the relation between the price and the stock market. Okay, so the price and the stock market, you need to get historical values for the stock and historical values for the index. Okay, that's why the calculated beta may not represent the future beta of the stock. The beta may change over time based on the deviations or the volatility in the stock prices relative to the change in the stock market. That's why it may not yield an accurate value. Okay, this is the most important drawback related to the capital asset pricing model, although capital asset pricing model play a hero role in the researches, in the academic articles. You will find capital asset pricing model has a big role in their researches. Another drawback is that capital asset pricing model assumes that the market is efficient. Do you remember the efficient market hypothesis, that the market is purely efficient, the news arrive to everyone equally, at the same time, the people interpret those news the same, okay, and the stock prices reflect actually the value or the real value of the stock, and this is not the case. It assumes that people are taking rational decisions. This is not the case. Actually, in the stock markets, we have behavioral effects. People are not all people are rational. We have herding effect. People just follow the stocks that has increasing prices and sell the stocks that have falling prices. They are not all of them analyzed or studied the stock very well before taking investment decision in it. So we don't have pure market efficiency, and this is another drawback related to the capital asset pricing model. But again, it's still used in the market in order to calculate the cost of equity. For example, we will notice this. We will take this in other chapters, inshallah. So it plays a hero role in researchers and in the market while calculating the fair value of the stocks. Okay, I just want to thank you and hope you enjoyed this chapter. See you inshallah in the next chapter.